Hello everybody, my name is Didi Verg and I'm the host of miraclesofmind.tv, and today I have with me my very special guest, Lesley Mitchell Clarke. Welcome to the show, Lesley.
Thank you, Didi. It's such a pleasure to be with you. So looking forward to it.
Excellent. Hey, so let me tell you a little bit about Lesley because she's quite amazing. First of all, she comes from an interesting, what we call hypnosis lineage. And that lineage is, she used to work for the famed Georgina Cannon. So I don't know how much everybody knows about past life regression, but there was Brian Weiss and Michael Newton, and then there was Georgina Cannon, and she was working out of Toronto, Ontario, Canada. Now she was known as the famed celebrity hypnotist. And she used to be very close friends, and probably still is, with Shirley MacLaine.
Oh, yes, indeed. In fact, she hosts Shirley's chat room at least once a month on Shirley MacLaine's website. They're still very close friends.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, and celebrities literally used to fly in from around the world just to see Georgina and Lesley for past life regression. So you've had a lot of experience, and I'm no doubt that you've had some interesting people that you've worked with, even though we probably know you can't say their names.
Well, yes, and unfortunately, I cannot do that. We're bound by, medical privilege consultation, but I certainly have been very blessed to work with a lot of fascinating people from the entertainment world, many of whom you may recognize from television and film.
Okay, excellent. Now, Lesley has also been a hypnotherapist. She first began when she was a psychiatric nurse technician, and they did, back in the day, allow you to use hypnosis there.
Absolutely. It was an integrative process that was accepted along with doing any kind of group therapy or anything else. We were allowed to use hypnosis. And then I formalized my training here in Canada and got very specific by, of course, studying and apprenticing with Dr. Georgina Cannon.
Wonderful. So today Lesley's going to be sharing with us not just about what she's seen and experienced in past life regression and in between life regression, but the miracle healings that occurred as a result of that. So first of all, tell me a little bit about your first, because I know I've done past life regressions, and if I always say, right, if there was one thing that I'd give away for free in hypnosis, it's past life regressions, because I find that you get the most bang for your buck when you do a past life regression.
Yes.
People just have instantaneous healings.
They do. Yeah.
Now, and I remember my first one, it was like, wow, 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 wow. And everyone after that is wow. There's never been an uninteresting one.
That's
Every
right.
single one has been different. So what was it like for you when you did your first few past life regressions?
I was in awe, I would have to say, by not only the power of the process, but how fluid and easy the process was, and also the commonality of the experiences that people had as they passed through the birth experience and back into a former life, and the incredible power for healing. Because, as hypnotherapists, we're always trying to get to the origin of a problem, the kernel. We do it through parts work, various other ways, but sometimes you just can't get to it. And in those cases, I'm sure you do the same thing, I will most often recommend that we go to a past life regression process. And invariably, the answer is just right there, because for whatever reason, whether the individual does it themselves or whether it's from some higher power, I don't care, but just what the person needs to know usually comes right up. Because we've all had, in my belief system, in your belief system, many, maybe even countless past lives. So it's important. It's amazing to me that the right thing pops up, I guess I should say. So just like you, I was amazed.
Yeah, and it seems to be whatever the intention is going in. And I mean, it's we look at patterns, do we not? Like,
we do. What
is a pattern that keeps reoccurring in your life? However, you cannot understand why that's there. It doesn't make any sense in this life. So tell us about one of those experiences you had where somebody had a reoccurring pattern in their life. They couldn't understand. It didn't make any sense, according to the parents they were born by in this. lifetime.
Yes.
But yet when you took it back to a past life, it all made sense, and the person had a grand transformation or healing as a result.
An epiphany and a healing.
Yeah.
I think one of the most profound ones, and this happened fairly recently, I was working with, I suppose you would say, an elderly lady, and bless her heart, she was very brave, she had tried everything, she was really suffering with a chronic pain syndrome, perhaps fibromyalgia. It was fairly undiagnosed, but she could barely walk. She was in constant, unending, relentless pain. And everything that I did from a therapeutic standpoint that we traditionally do in pain management was just falling short. It maybe helped a bit, but it wasn't really getting to it.
Which, by the way, is a big sign. When something's not working, we have to look at the deeper levels.
We have to.
Because pain management and hypnosis is usually, you know, it works.
It does work. I mean, we teach someone how to release chemicals from the brain to go to that spot, and we have some very quick processes that are highly, highly effective, but nothing that I did was working.
And that was the sign. That
was the sign.
Okay, so what happened?
Well, I recommended a regression, and she immediately went into trance, and it was rather effortless to get her where she needed to go. And she began recalling a very sad life, where she was in India, and she was of the lowest possible class, and untouchable. Really, really a slave, if you want to come down to it. And she worked for some wealthy, influential family in a huge mansion, and her job every day was to go to this location and pump water from the well. I mean, all day, until her body was so racked with exhaustion. I mean, this would go on from the crack of dawn until...
And they probably didn't feed her.
Or no, they couldn't even really look at her. And she lived in a shack on the property, or even looked like a hut. It was extremely primitive looking. Now we don't exactly know what kind of time period we're talking about. You know, sometimes I can get people to see a newspaper, or sometimes we have an idea. But this just seemed to be quite ancient, but not ancient, so ancient that there wasn't a mechanical pump.
Right.
So, at any rate, she went through this life of terrible labor, the body racked with pain, and the saddest part of it was at the end of her life, when she was ready to die, really from overwork. No one even looked at her. They had her on a little mat in her hut, and one of the more senior servants was just there to observe when she died, so they could get rid of her body. There was no love, there was no compassion, there was no kindness, there was nothing but this relentless labor, day in, day out, day in, day out. So after that experience, and of course we do a lot of work integrating these experiences and helping the person to process it. We don't just take them there and then they're on their way. Right. The whole, we call it the aftercare, is very involved. And so she came to the realization that she was in fact carrying that pain from her lifetime, which was reflected in, she was now a widow, there was loneliness, there was some of these.
Is that what triggered it?
I believe so. I believe that the pain really amped up when she became a widow and was alone and had taken on the role of grandmother, really, to help her daughter. And so there was not this horrific labor, but she was in a less senior position, and she was alone. So I think that was, in fact, the trigger. And amazingly enough, and again, this process just takes my breath away.
Yeah.
When we got done with our work, this relentless pain that she had lived with for probably a decade was gone.
Completely gone?
Completely gone.
Wow.
Completely.
And how is she today?
I had the privilege to speak to her maybe 3 years ago, and the treatment had completely, negated the pain. To this day. She was able to walk around, be active, sleep. It was this pain, this physical, emotional, and spiritual pain of this particularly brutal and unkind past life was transmuted into understanding, and the body was holding that pain.
Now, an interesting question that I'm sure our audience also has is, why do people get born into a lifetime like that? That just seems like suffering and torture.
It does indeed. And of course, you know, we can't really know the complete answer to that. Sure. But what I would say, and we get into this a little bit more when we do what we would call life between life or interlife explorations. And it seems to be that people actually do make plans to come in to a specific lifetime. Generally speaking, we travel in soul groups. Okay. So part of this decision may involve other people, like, are we going to come in together? Will you be my mother? Will you be my sister or brother? So these things get figured out. But everything is a learning experience. And I would say that a lifetime like that, this woman was one of the most compassionate people I've ever met.
I guess that would give you a great sense of compassion.
I mean, how could it not? If many people who have had racist or prejudiced ideas, we go back to a life and they're in a Native American tribe, or they've lived these other lifetimes, and it's a complete epiphany. And they grow spiritually because the life has been a learning experience.
Can you share with us some of those in-between life states that you've gotten into people when they've engaged in the decision-making process of what?
Yes.
Or sometimes we bring people in between lives after they've just died to review.
Oh yes.
The past
life. I think what one of the big things that the late and great Michael Newton was able to determine was people have a great commonality of experience. And when we transition, we're still physical. We're just in a lighter physical body, a less dense physical body, and we can of course travel at the speed of thought. So there are some differences, but it's not an alien experience.
Is it a spirit form? Is that what it is?
I think that when you're talking about the etheric body, it is more physical than one's spirit, one's soul. Okay. I think it maintains a shape. Sure. And some and physicality on the other side, where everything is less dense.
Right. Okay.
So I think it might be a little bit different.
Sure.
So invariably, people are greeted by, when they transition, they're greeted by either beloved relatives. Sometimes they're greeted by religious figures. I think whatever it is that will comfort the person is what happens,
and probably in line with their belief system.
Oh yes, in fact I think that even if the image of Christ or the Mother Mary or the Prophet Muhammad shows up, I'm not necessarily sure that it is those beings.
Yes.
But it could be a highly evolved being or spirit guide presenting that image. Whatever will comfort the person and make the transition easiest is usually what they see. And so following that, there's usually a kind of a reunion.
Okay.
Where people go to a place and then maybe your beloved father you knew in the recent life, people from other lifetimes, because that's really our home, I guess, is the point. That's where we really live. We come down here in this dense reality because it's like school. So there's a time where you meet and engage, and then there's generally a review of your most recent life. Now, I don't mean this in a punishment kind of, you were wrong kind of way, but there can be a review, and most people report that the review happens in front of a kind of a council. And the council seems to be benevolent beings, which are usually, either evolved masters and here's an interesting thing, sometimes people see beings on the council that are not necessarily humanoid.
Interesting. Okay.
You know, that they may appear to be, I mean, they're humanoid in the sense of, but they may appear to be, have elongated skulls, or, you know, they see what we would call maybe extraterrestrial beings. So,
so interesting.
We seem to be in the same soul group.
But it's been said that we don't always reincarnate only to Earth.
No, we don't.
Because I remember going to a lecture by Michael Newton, and I've had this very strange experience, and I've asked a lot of people about it, but only one other of my very, very good friends who I feel very connected to has had it. And he asked the question, he said, who here has dreams where they can breathe underwater?
Oh, yeah.
It is the most... I am underwater and I can always breathe.
Yes, yes.
And he said that is because we have incarnated to a planet where that was possible.
Yes. Yes.
So I now understand what you mean when you say there's other beings, because it's not necessary, according to Michael Newton, that we always reincarnate to Earth.
That's very true. And many times, you know, I'll incarnate someone and they'll start describing a planet and they'll start talking about two suns, that it's like a binary system. And this aspect that you mentioned of breathing water is not that unusual.
It is so natural and normal to me when I dream to breathe underwater. It is the most, it's like Lesley and I sitting on this couch breathing air. And it's just the most bizarre thing to comprehend.
It absolutely happens. And in fact, even in our physicality now, we could do it. We do it as babies. And for deep sea diving, they have an incredibly intensified fluid where people do inhale the fluid and can in fact breathe it. So we are even capable of that in these bodies. So it's not a huge step at all. So there's a council, and I think that people see images, and then they usually discuss if they want to come back, because not everybody does.
Well, I can understand after that poor lifetime of that dear soul.
Or people have done enough and they would prefer to teach and live and do constructive things in the other levels of existence. They're not made to come back. It's a choice. And so usually with the council, there's some sort of a plan put in place. And from what clients report is that if the plan is too difficult, because people usually make things
they're overzealous.
They're overzealous.
Like, I really want to learn this.
I'm really going to do this.
I'm going to be born into an abusive relationship.
Yes, I'm going to have this awful person come in as my mother. We know about that, and you know, and I'm going to triumph. So generally, the council says, you know, slow down.
Yeah,
you don't have to do it all at once. Let's do this, that, and the other. And
so they generally advise.
And then people often take what we would call recreational time to just heal their souls. And of course, since everything is kind of mental, they can create these idyllic environments, you know, at the ocean or in the great library of Alexandria. And there are, in fact, libraries and structures and things that are common to all people.
I understand that there's a place that contains the Akashic records where everybody has a book. Have you ever hypnotized anyone where they could, you know, see their past lives in the Akashic records?
How I have heard that manifest is that yes, there is a great library of Akashic records, but they simply are in front of a terminal of some sort where they visually see things. Now, maybe it would depend on what you're more comfortable with. Maybe if you want to experience it as a book with pictures, you can. But I think many, I've only, and this isn't true of seniors, I mean, I've only ever heard of them being in that place where all this information is. But, you know, the Akasha in the Sanskrit word means kind of like atmosphere and all that is. So I think that this data lives in the great unconscious, sort of. The collective. I'm not sure it's contained in books, but most people report going to a specific place that has the ancient books, and they go to a kind of a terminal and they can see what they wish to see.
Excellent. So share with us some more examples of people, like say for example, why would someone be born into a life with an abuser?
Well, that's an interesting question. And of course, we can't know, the deepest reasons. But I will tell you, I was working with a young woman, relatively young woman, who had a pattern of abusive relationships. I mean, and she was intelligent, accomplished, educated. We're not talking about someone in moral decay or dealing with addiction.
What was her family background? Did she come from a family that was not abusive?
She came from a family with an abusive father.
Okay.
So even the father, and at first I concentrated, well, this must be point zero. This must be where it all comes from.
She learned from her father to choose men.
Yes.
But in fact, it wasn't the case?
It was more complex than that, because we went through forgiving the father and I did everything I could think of.
Again, that's the sign. You do everything, and if nothing's really working,
nothing was working.
Gotta go back to source.
And I think that she came because she was in a relationship and she couldn't pull herself out of it. This was the problem. She would get into these relationships with abusers, and she would be powerless to move ahead, and she would be almost addicted to the relationship. Well, we went back to a lifetime where I believe she had been taken as a slave by a sea captain. Okay. And we're talking the Middle Ages or earlier, but the degree of the sophistication of the ships, probably the 1300s, something like that. And as a slave, all of her power was taken. She had to perform sexually. She was starved, and this sea captain was the ground zero abuser who was now in her life as the most current boyfriend, and she recognized him immediately. She said, that's so and so.
Can you say a little bit more about that? Because I've had that experience too, where people recognize someone instantly from their current life that was in that past life.
Well, the soul mind recognizes the soul.
Right.
It doesn't matter, and
how they manifest.
Yeah. And I think also there's a memory of having put these things in place for whatever reason.
Okay.
Now, why would someone experience this cumulative abuse? For compassion, maybe to work in that area, helping other abused women. Sometimes you can't understand things until you truly experience them. But what we did do is, once it was identified that she had been made powerless, and it was kind of a Stockholm syndrome, where he was the only one who even gave her a crust of bread. She came to depend on him and have a kind of an attachment.
Sure.
So it was that attachment that had continued on. And once we explored these things, it was as if a huge weight had been lifted from her. And this is very common. People feel, oh my God.
So I can now I get it.
Now I get it. And she took her power back. She immediately was able to kick that abuser to the curb. She left the relationship. I believe that she went back to school and became a psychotherapist.
And is it true that for karma purposes, like she chose a lifetime with him, and again, you'll let me know if you believe this is true, but she chose a lifetime with him so that he could also make up to her for...
Oh, yes.
But apparently he was falling short.
Well, but again, these people were rather young. I'd say this woman was in maybe her early 30s. So we can't be sure about what happened to the abuser. He may have had an epiphany when she left him.
Right.
He may have, become involved with some way to help men who have anger issues. Yeah. I wish I did know the answer to that question, but as you say, things happen if it's to benefit for all concerned. And when we do a regression and we do healing and we do aftercare, this is always the ongoing message. If it is of benefit to all concerned.
If everybody's learning and growing.
If everyone's learning and growing. So we are interconnected in ways that we cannot even imagine. And I think one thing I would really like to get across, once individuals understand that there is a kind of a plan in place, a changeable, mutable plan, but a kind of a plan, a map, and it is designed for learning, people begin to take responsibility in a new way. They're no longer victims. Like, they're no longer belly aching and saying, oh, my mother was so awful to me, she was dismissive and blah, blah, blah. The point is, maybe you picked your mother simply for DNA. Maybe you needed to look a certain way or have a certain characteristic, musical ability, the ability to write. We don't know. But there are reasons why people select their parentage, and you are always in on it. You're not thrust into this, Dickensian.
It's a choice.
It is a choice. And
we just forget that we had a choice at some point when we get born into it.
We forget.
Like, who would be in an abusive relationship saying, I chose this to grow at some level? No, we forget.
Completely. It becomes shrouded by our terrestrial emotions. And then, as we know from hypnotherapy, behaviors become patterns. Then it becomes neural pathways. And so it is a challenge. But once someone comes here, that means that they are ready and they want to make a change, whether or not we need to go into a past life or not. So once people start taking responsibility, then they're no longer victims, because somehow, I guess victimhood must be almost like a drug. I know you've experienced that. Yeah. So many people, their story, their victimhood has become their cause célèbre.
On something else. It's easier to blame it on something else than to say, I made a certain choice that led to this condition. Maybe it's hard for people to face.
It is, but like Joan Rivers, sometimes we just have to say, grow up.
Grow up, will ya?
Grow up. This is, yes, you had a terrible, horrible, and sometimes I will tell people, if I'm really particularly irritated by their belly aching, I will say, well, on a scale of 0 to 10, and the stories that you and I and our fellow practitioners hear, I will say, you're about a 1.5. So step out of out of yourself. Step out of yourself and your ego-based thinking.
Okay. Now, I've obviously interviewed many hypnotists on past life and miracles in general.
Yes.
Have you ever seen anything we would describe as either miraculous or paranormal? Because I've interviewed many hypnotists where people have been regressed into a past life and they've actually started speaking another language that was unknown to them. It's called Xenoglossy.
Yes, I have experienced that.
Oh my God, I just find that fascinating.
Yeah, I experienced that.
What language did they speak?
I took someone back to a kind of an ancient Irish tribal existence. So it would have been some form of early Gaelic, which of course, that's one of the earliest languages in the world. It's heavily Sanskrit.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, as is the Basque language is also extremely ancient. But I recorded some of it. I recorded all of it. I did, and my dear brother-in-law is we're of Irish ancestry, but he's actually from Ireland, and he was able to even recognize some words. So I know that it was legitimate. So I've experienced that. I have experienced someone speaking Asian languages, maybe Chinese or Thai or perhaps Korean.
And what nationality or what descent were they of in this life?
Italian, I think.
Oh, so there you go. So it's not like I just picked up Chinese the other day.
Right. It wasn't like, there's a theory that yes, we have like racial memories and everything is included in everything lives in our spinal column. Well, some memories may live in the spinal column. They live in the amygdala and other places in the brain.
But to speak an actual whole other language that is not, Italian and Chinese are so far apart from one another.
Yeah.
So tell us about, I love the story of, because Lesley and I are close friends. She told me a story once about how you did a past life regression on your son.
Oh, yes.
And this to me blew my mind.
Yes.
Because you knew him from the time,
yes, from the very beginning.
So he had an issue with, I believe it was loud noises.
You're right. You're absolutely right. My first son, Christopher, as a child, was terrified of loud sounds. Now, this wasn't a side effect of autism or ADD or anything.
right.
This was because this is a kid that could go on a roller coaster or do all kinds of, you know, scary stuff. But
Right.
even when he was a tiny baby, you know, we would take him to, well, not a tiny baby, but old enough to enjoy fireworks. He would almost go into a coma, almost retreat into a, you know, a comatic state. He was so terrified. And also, when he was very little, he drew me a picture one day, and he was always attracted. He always wanted Asian food. He would say, "Oh, Asian women are they're the most beautiful girls." And I mean, it was just obsession with all things Asian. And so he drew me a picture. He said, "This is my other family."
And how old was he?
Oh boy, little, 3.
3, and that's usually when they still remember.
Yeah, they still do. So he said, "This is my other family," and there was a picture of a father, and the mother was in some kind of kimono. They all had black hair, and he said, "This is my sister, and I don't. Sadly, I don't have a daughter. This is my sister, and this is my other brother," and because he used to talk about his other parents from early on. I mean, as soon as he could talk, he talked about his other parents. So when he got to be old enough and when he was interested, you know, we did a past life regression, and immediately we went back to a Japanese lifetime where I believe that he had been a kamikaze pilot. One of these very young men who had been brainwashed into thinking that this was the ultimate magnificent thing you could do for your country and your honor, and then, you know, they crashed their planes right into the aircraft carriers, generally speaking, and of course, and this was traumatic, I guess, because when he ended up on the other side after that experience, he realized that it was an empty experience, a useless experience. Sure. He had ended his young life for what he felt was no reason. So he came back really quickly, because this is World War II.
Sure.
And we do find that, and this has happened, gosh, so many times, people who have had lives that ended during World War II have come back very quickly. I'd say a large percentage of people that I work with had some kind of World War II life where they were killed.
So what was the result of having done that with him?
The result of having done that with him was not only the complete absence of fear of loud sounds. In fact, his rock band at the time got even louder. I'm sorry to say. I'm sorry to say there were no limits. It went up to 11. So there was no fear of anything
Fireworks,
of that nature.
Could he go to fireworks?
He could go to fireworks. He could do anything. And I think even beyond that, there was a self-forgiveness for having been caught up in the sort of brainwashing, for lack of a better term, with this religion he didn't accept now, and this idea, and he felt as if he had wasted his precious life. And that was forgiveness for himself.
Yes.
And you know, he's a great kid. He's very creative. He still does music. He's a writer. He's a director. He's an actor, and totally open to all these things now.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So share one last healing story. Like, I love to hear the transformation that occurs with people. When they go in and they have such a debilitating limitation in this life, and then you just get them back to this past life, and it's gone.
I hypnotized one. She was definitely middle-aged, and she was suffering, like many of our clients, incredible allergies and really debilitating asthma. Just debilitating asthma. She was on the puffers, and of course she couldn't sleep because the puffers all have amphetamine-like properties. Yeah. So and usually when I do a regression, we usually go to 3 lives if there's time. We can't keep people under too long. They get too exhausted.
Yes.
Like Michael Newton, bless his heart, the late Michael Newton, when he first discovered interlife regression, he was keeping people under for like 4 and 5 hours.
Wow.
And you'd have to keep I mean, this is something that would...
I'd need to break for lunch.
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, it would really be, it's really bad therapeutic practice.
He was, you know what, it was so exciting and
Yes.
novel at the time. I can see why he did
I
it.
can see why he did it too.
Yeah.
But at any rate, I brought this lovely lady back to a lifetime where she was a school teacher at the turn of the last century. I'm talking around 1900, and this was definitely England, and it was the slums of London. In fact, it was almost Jane Eyre-like. It almost seemed as if she was teaching in a settlement house or a poorhouse. The children were ragged, they had bare feet, and she had tuberculosis.
Oh.
And she, in fact, dealt what they would have called consumption at the time. She referred to it as consumption when she was in trance. And of course, she died very young, always cold, never enough to eat. And the consumption, took her life. She basically kind of like, drowned in her own cardiac fluid. I think it was a heart attack. I don't know. It was brutal. Now, when we got done with that process, she realized that she had taken that tuberculosis, she had taken that lung disease into her present life. And from the moment that she realized that she had brought it with her, that it wasn't anything she was eating, it wasn't wheat, it wasn't, it was the body was holding it. Again, we had a young, frustrated life. We had a life that was cut short, a life that would involve poverty and, to a certain extent, servitude and unhappiness and penury and all these bad things. And she was able to release that from her body. And I remember that the asthma became so corrected that I don't think she even used a puffer after that. I'm not going to say it went away 1,000%, 100%. I don't remember it like that, but what I do remember is it went into the background, and she was able to eliminate most of her medication, and she was again very concerned with social welfare. Her interest, I think she was a very wealthy woman who didn't have to work necessarily, but she became involved in all kinds of volunteer programs in one of the tougher parts of our city, in education and getting kids meals for kids. So again, she was able to step out of herself. She was no longer the victim of this debilitating asthma.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you,
It's been
Didi.
an absolute pleasure
Thank
interviewing
you
you today.
so much. I really appreciate being able to chat with your peeps out here
Very
about
interesting stuff.
Thank you, folks. All right.